Yes, that's Amtrak's president. Yes, that's the new train. Yes, I was invited on board the press tour. But there's just one big issue I found with the train. Now, wait a second. Didn't I put out a video 2 years ago that was saying that this Acela wasn't that good? Well, yes I did, but most of that video is just talking about what's currently causing the delays, but now it's going into service, so we can finally talk about all of the details, specifically with riding it and basically what's better about it. I'll touch on it again later of what caused the delays, but let's talk about the trip. I was thankfully invited aboard the press train as it went northbound out of New York Penn Station, and I was on board till New Haven. So not a very long trip, but I was very thankful to be on board to talk to many Amtrak employees, people that worked at Alstom on teams that built the train, or at least did many different projects with it, and many different press people that were on the train going north. Once I got to Moynihan, I checked in with Amtrak and went down to the tracks to board the train. It was such an interesting feeling stepping aboard something so new, or at least something that hasn't been in service yet. It had the new train smell, which the best I can describe smells like a new airliner or something that's like outgassing a little bit of vinyl smell. Anyway, we left on time and I got to explore a lot of the train, but I didn't have too much time to explore because a lot of my time was also spent talking to the people on board and connecting with a lot of people that were interested both in talking to me, but also talking about the train in general. Compared to the old Acela, one thing that's immediately obvious when on board this is that the tilting technology is way better and the ride quality is way better. One of the major mechanical differences between the new Acela and the old one is that the new one uses a thing called Jacob's bogies, which is essentially when two coach cars share the same truck or bogie with wheels on them between the two coaches. You can see here that the train set shares a truck in between passenger cars on this design. By the way, the Jacob's bogie is not a new concept at all. The design is actually almost 100 years old at this point, and we're going to talk about a company later that was one of the first to use it. For the older Acela design, that's not the case, and there's a whole history to that, which maybe we should go over really quickly. The original Acela is a train that almost didn't exist, and Amtrak basically scrambled together what they could to build it. And it's all a product of Amtrak of the 90s. In the early 90s, to get into the idea of high-speed rail, Amtrak actually imported two high-speed rail train sets from Europe. The Intercity Express from Siemens or Deutsche Bahn, and the Swedish X2000. Out of the two, the X2000 was the logical choice for Amtrak, as it had the tilting capabilities and similar build quality because of Bud Company licensing to other Amtrak equipment. But for various reasons, including lack of funding because of the Clinton era, and also because ABB raised the price in a very weird scheme for the X2000, Amtrak never ended up with the X2000. Amtrak still wanted a high-speed train, so essentially they did the equivalent of going to the kitchen and seeing what scraps you have left and trying to make a meal out of it. And what came out of those scraps is the first generation Acela, which essentially is LRC cars built by Bombardier smushed in between two TGV duplex power cars made by Alstom. Oh, and since the FRA is made of a bunch of old heads that only understand freight railroading, the LRC cars had to be built out of steel, not their typical aluminum construction. So in an ironic twist of fate, the LRC cars used by VIA in Canada are actually lighter than the Acelas, which is an actual high-speed train. Because of this, all of the Alstom engineers working on the original Acela called it the pig. So to say that the original Acela was a mess is an understatement. But honestly, the original Acela was probably the only train that could ever have happened, especially when Amtrak was left with scraps in the late 90s. And up until this new train running, the old Acela was the fastest high-speed train in North America. Hell, the Western Hemisphere. Did the first-gen Acela have many problems? Yes. Are they very tired and very weary from running all of these years and actually running 5 more years than they should be? Yes. But is there one thing that the old generation of Acelas have that the new generation does not and fails completely at? Actually, yes. So this means it's now time to talk about the new train, and specifically the history of how we got to this point.
Vice President Joe Biden announced today the federal government is giving a $2 billion loan to Amtrak to modernize rail service along the Northeast Corridor.
The $2.4 billion government loan to Amtrak will go towards 28 new high-speed Acela trains that will travel between Boston and Washington, D.C. at a top speed of 186 miles per hour.
The actual start of the second generation Acela started before 2016, because obviously they didn't show up the day of and ask a manufacturer the day of getting that loan. Oh no, the actual creation of what was needed for the second generation Acela was put out a year or something before then. Amtrak obviously put out a few requests for this next generation. It had to be lighter, it had to carry more people, and most importantly, it still had to be a tilting train. For most rolling stock manufacturers around the world, those first two items are very easy to meet. The real issue is building a tilting train. Not many people can do that. And not only did Amtrak want a tilting train, they wanted one that could tilt more than the old Acela. And the only rolling stock manufacturer that could satisfy that request was Alstom. You see, the part where details get muddy and rumors begin is the procurement process. Because allegedly, Amtrak asked Alstom for a version of their Pendolino trains, which Alstom had been making for about the last 30 years for different European operators. Alstom basically came back to Amtrak and said something along the lines of, "Oh, you do not want that older train. We have a brand new train for you." And they did. They had the new TGV-M platform, or the Acela platform, which Amtrak would be the first customer for with the Acela Liberty. You ever have someone tell you when you're buying a new car never to buy the first year or first model year of a new generation of that car? Well, it's kind of similar with trains. It's not exactly the same, but when it comes to a new platform like the Acela platform, it's kind of true. And that's where we get back to the beginning of the video. Alstom started delivering these train sets, and they started working out the kinks and the problems with the new platform. And also because it's a new platform, they were lacking some of the computer models to properly simulate it on older infrastructure like the Northeast Corridor. Fast forward to 2023, that's when we got the famous Amtrak OIG report that called out the delays and what was causing them. But 2 years after that, the Acela's finally launched in August of 2025. And like I said before, I was very lucky to be on the launch day press train. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I think that the new Acelas are a massive improvement over the old ones, especially because they are 20 years newer. They ride better, they have better bathrooms, and they have way better amenities generally. And most importantly, the capacity increases the lower energy use, and once they work out the kinks, the reliability will be way better than the first generation Acelas. Okay, I'm done glazing the trains. They are very good, but there is also one big glaring issue. But to introduce the topic of what's wrong, first we need to talk about the idea of grounded theory. And no, it's not some theory that's grounded in fact. No, we are in fact talking about the ground. The theory essentially goes something like this. Anything that you put between yourself and the ground has to be of high quality, and that will make your life a lot easier and better and more comfy generally. So for example, the most basics. You want to buy good shoes because shoes are between you and the ground. You want to have a good mattress because 1/3 of your life is roughly sleeping. And this doesn't just apply for personal items. Say you want to drive a car. You need to have a good road because the road is between you and the ground, and you have to have a car that's very cushiony so you have a nice ride between you and the ground, like this nice American compact car here. And when we're talking about vehicles, obviously, it's not just the suspension and ride quality of the vehicle, it's also the seats. Seats are incredibly important because 90% of the time when we're interacting with the doohickeys, contraptions, or vehiculars, we are generally sitting in a chair or some kind of seat. And a passenger train is essentially a tubular volume that moves through space with a bunch of seats that we sit in to get transported somewhere. And one thing that Amtrak has excelled at, for a while, has been the seats in their trains. Compared to a lot of European trains or other trains around the world, Amtrak seats are cushiony, lush, and basically lazy boys. So it's really frustrating with this new generation of Acelas that we have seemed to accept European seat austerity for some reason. These stock photos are fine, whatever. I don't like the Photoshop way they did these pictures, but I think I dislike these seats less because of the physical comfiness of them and more about what they represent. And the best way I can show you is to show you the recline. Yup, that's it. And you want to see something even worse? Yeah, those are the first class seats, which are apparently the same as business class. You're telling me the flagship train for your entire railroad does not have recline in first class? Are you serious? Look, I don't care whose fault it was. This is a failure. And don't start with me about the new Siemens Aero trains either. I've seen the seats on those. They don't look like they recline. Okay, say that they're right in that we don't have any seat vendors that give you proper seats. We have lost the technology for fucking recline. Okay, do you know the relevance of this picture right here for the rail industry? Okay, this guy right here is sitting in a nuclear launch facility in the 1980s. And that chair right there is actually relevant to Amtrak. Because in the 1970s, when God's favorite stainless steel tube was created in the Holy Lands of Philadelphia, the Bud Company and Amtrak actually contracted a military contractor, specifically AMI Industries, a subsidiary of Raytheon Technologies, to build the M Fleet seats. So, modern Amtrak. I don't think you have an excuse. Because if the Bud Company and 1970s Amtrak could go to a defense contractor to get seats, I don't think there's much of an excuse to have such terrible seats in new trains. I think this is largely caused by the policy issue of losing all domestic railcar manufacturers in the US and having to get other manufacturers from elsewhere to move into the US again. That sounds like a rant for another video. Anyway, the Amfleets will probably outlive the new Acela for some godforsaken reason. And just know that the Amfleets share a family tree with the Tomahawk missile. I should reiterate again, the new Acela is very good, we just have to fix these seats. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thank you of course to my Patreons for supporting me and these videos. And of course, check out my Discord if you want discussion on the topic that happens in these videos. There's plenty of rail fans and people like that that are always very heavily discussing these topics. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.